Hey, welcome back guys to Introduction to Node.js, Express.js and MongoDB. My name is Kaustubh Gharge, but you can call me KG. We will be working on our first project for this course today. Before we begin, let's look at the session outline. So in this session, we'll be first covering the recap of the previous sessions and what we have learned thus far. We'll do a quick review and quick refresher of what a REST API is, since in this project we'll be building an application based on it. Afterwards, we will work on our first project, for which we'll be building an application that gets a new record for employees and stores it in our MongoDB database. So thus far, we have covered fundamentals of Node.js. We have learned how we can use a framework called Express to build REST APIs. We also learned how to configure MongoDB and use it to store our data. Right. So in this project, we're going to be creating a simple RESTful API application. So a quick refresher of REST API will be helpful. REST stands for Representational State Transfer. It is a set of rules that developers follow when they create their API. It's like a contract between front-end and back-end systems to perform the data interchange. So in this project, we're going to be building RESTful API using Node.js and MongoDB. We are creating a simple API that stores personnel records for an accounting department in our company. These are the project requirements. So you must have Node.js installed, and also if you want, you can use Node Version Manager to install or handle multiple versions of Node.js on your local system. Make sure you have an account on MongoDB Atlas. It's always better to set up your database on the MongoDB Atlas rather than on your system. And you can also use a code editor like Visual Studio Code to write your code. So again, the project source code files are on my GitHub. You can download them. You can directly run and see how the program works, or you can just compare with your own code. I would recommend the latter. First, try building it on your own by following the video of what I'll be working on, and then you can just review the code if necessary. All right, so let's begin the project. All right, so this is the project overview. The first thing we need to do is we need to initialize the project. And to do that, we need to create an application folder where our application will reside. To initialize the application, we will have to create a package.json file, which will hold all the metadata for the Node application. This file allows NPM to handle installing the package dependencies and scripts that we will write to handle the application. Assuming you have Node.js installed, let's go ahead and create this file. So I'll just move over to the Visual Studio Code and we'll revisit the slides later. So in my Visual Studio Code editor, I've created a folder and I've opened that folder, blank folder in Visual Studio Code. And in here, I'm going to start a new terminal instance. Make some space here. All right, so the command that we'll be running to initialize the application is npm init. So if you remember, oops, all right, npm init. So if you remember, npm init also has a flag of y, -y, where it will accept the default values. So in our case, I'm really fine with the default values, so I'm just going to select -y so that the package.json gets created quickly, and I'll just press enter. So if you notice, it created a package.json file. If we move to the folder structure, here is the file, and in here we have the default name that has been selected. That is the name of the folder, project 1. We have version 1.0. There is no description because we haven't provided anything, and it assumed that the file that we'll be creating is called index.js, which is fine. We'll create index.js. If you want, you can create a different file with a different name, but we'll be creating index.json file. Then all the other fields are the default values, which we are technically fine. So let's go ahead and create this index.js file before we proceed. I'll just save this. So this is the file that will act like a command central for our application. This file will be executed first by npm when we ask it to run our application. This file will also have the object instances for multiple modules that we'll write, as well as third-party modules that are like dependencies that will be installing from the npm directory. These modules are dependencies for the project, so we'll actually install them right now. So let me expand the terminal and make sure install the dependencies. All right. So let me first type it up and then I'll explain what we are installing. So I'll just say npm, oops, come on, npm install express MongoDB body parser. And I'm going to be using flag of save so that these dependencies are added in my package.json file. I'll just press enter. And if you notice the folder structure, it created a new folder for node modules and it added all the dependencies in here. And if you now look at the package.json file, it added these modules as dependencies since we use the save flag. All right, so they added body parser, express, and MongoDB. Okay. So what are these dependencies? So Express, like we saw in session 3, Express is a Node.js framework, and MongoDB is the official module provided by MongoDB team to help our Node.js application communicate with MongoDB. Body parser. So this package will allow us to handle request bodies with Express. Okay. So let me give you an example. So let's say you are sending a HTML form data that the user has submitted to the Node.js server. Okay, so you made a request to the server and HTTP sends your form data in bits and pieces, right? That's the HTTP protocol. It sends your data in bits and pieces, which are intended to get assembled at the destination. So the destination in this case is your Node application, the Node server. Okay, to extract these bits and pieces of data and assemble it in a format that can be useful, we use body parser middleware. Okay, so let's actually add some code in here. So let's first initialize the objects for these dependencies. So I'll just say const express equals require express. Next thing is we'll do for body parser. Require, oops, I forgot the double quotes here, a mistake. Here we have body parser. All right, for Mongo, we only need Mongo client and object ID. So I'm going to create two separate variables for that. So I'll just say Mongo client equals require MongoDB and the Mongo client. All right, so if you notice, what IntelliSense gives us is the multiple options here. So it gives us Mongo client, Mongo error, Mongo network error, and all the other options here. I'm just going to select Mongo client for now. That's because that's what we need to make the connection. The semicolon, and we will also need to assign object ID and work with object IDs. Okay, so I'll just set object ID equals require MongoDB and object ID. All right, great. So we've added the dependencies. So here we imported all of our downloaded dependencies. Now we initialize the Express framework by utilizing this Express object. So that will be used to start the server. Okay, so first of all, let's initialize this object here. So I will say var app equals express. Oops. All right. Now we need to initiate the body parser with this application, the app object. So I'll just say app.use and use body parser .json. So we want the data in JSON. Okay. You also, if the data is sent on the URL encoded format, so we'll add the use case for that as well. So let me quickly reuse the same code and edit it. And in here, I will say URL encoded and set the extended as true. All right, perfect. Now let's start the server. So I'll just say app.listen. And the first parameter here is the port. So I'll set something for port 5000. I have a callback function and add a console log. I'll say server running at port 5000. All right, typo there. We save this and see if the application is fine. All right, so I think we're good. So here we imported our downloaded dependencies. We initialized the Express framework by utilizing the Express object. This is used to again initialize the body parser as well as start the server. And yeah, that's it. So everything looks fine. So let me go ahead and run this application. So I'll just say node index.js. And it gave us a response. It says server running at port 5000. So looks like we don't have any application errors. So everything seems to work fine. So great. Now let's work on establishing the connection with MongoDB. Okay, so let me again make some space here. Okay. So first of all, we will need the connection string for MongoDB. This can be found in Atlas dashboards. So I hope you created the Atlas dashboard, Atlas instance in session 4. So the string can be found in the Atlas dashboard by choosing clusters and then the overview tab followed by the connect button. We need to add this string to this index.js and make some changes to the code. So let me quickly add the changes. So first of all, let me create variables to set the connection URL as well as the database name. So I'll just say const connection URL equals blank. So I will add the connection URL in a moment. Make sure you get this connection URL from your Atlas instance. Do not copy mine. The rest of the stuff you can just follow along. So say database name. And the database that we are creating is accounting department. All right, perfect. Now, what we need to do is we need to make this connection with MongoDB, right? For that, we have Mongo client. We imported the Mongo client library. So let me go ahead and add some code here to connect. So I'll just say Mongo client.connect. And the first parameter here is the connection URL. Okay, so make sure you add your connection URL here. I'll be adding in just a moment, but you will use this connection URL as well as later on adding the database name. So let me first add the connection URL. So connection URL, I'll just say second parameter as use the new URL parser. And we'll have callback function. All right, so here we'll be handling error as well as the client. Save this. All right, so let's first handle the error. So we'll say if there is an error, we'll throw the error. All right, great. Now we need to assign the database we need to assign the database name when this client is connected. Okay, so let me quickly create two variables, one for database and one for collection. You'll see just in a moment how we use this. So we'll say database and collection. These are blank at the moment. Now here, let me set the database with the database name that I'm going to set. So in our case, if you notice, the database name that we have set is accounting department. So I'm just going to reuse this. All right, so once we get the database name, there's a typo here. All right. Now we need to set the collection. Okay, so the collection is personnel. So I'll just say collection equals database dot collection. And in here, I'll just say personnel. Okay, and that's it. Let's log the status out so that we know that we are connected to that specific database. So I'll just say connected to database name plus. All right, so I think this is fine. So let me do one thing. Let me go ahead quickly and get the connection string from my Atlas, and I'll be right back. All right, so I went ahead and added my connection URL. Make sure that the connection URL is for your specific Atlas instance and not mine. We also defined the database name, which we wish to create if not already present, and the collection as well. So we establish a connection once we start again the application and use the globally defined variables. So these two are the globally defined variables, and they can be used in each one of our endpoints. Okay, so let me save this and run this. So I'll just say node index.js. If I expand this, it says that the server is running at port 5000, and it says that connected to accounting department. So it looks like we don't have any error. You can ignore this warning over here. It just says that the server discovery and monitoring engine is being deprecated and will be removed in the future version. So it's fine. We are not worried about that at the moment. All we need to care about is the running of our application on port 5000 and the successful connection to the database. All right, so perfect. Looks like we got a good start. And in the next video, we will actually start building the REST API endpoints. So see you in the next video. All right, now we're going to develop endpoints for creating and querying the data. So let's create an endpoint to add the data. So let me first close the server, make some space here. All right, so before I start the server, I'm going to create my post endpoint to add the data. So I'll just say app.post, and the endpoint that I want to serve on is /personnel. All right, we'll have the request and response. And in here, we are going to insert into the collection. Okay, so we'll be using the collection.insert method and insert the data that we get from the request body. So I'll just say collection.insert, and I will just pass the request body as it is. Since we are using the body parser, that is fine. In here, I'm going to work with error and result. All right, so let's first deal with error. So let's say if there is an error, then we need to throw in an error of 500, or the status of 500. So I'll just respond using status of 500, and I'm going to send the error. All right. And if there is no error, then we'll say response.send and send the result. So before we actually send the result, let's log it out and see what we get. So let me comment this out. If you know exactly what the result is going to be, it's fine. But if you don't know, then make sure you can you log it out first and see if you need to transform the result. So okay, that looks fine. So if you notice, we aren't doing any data validation. But when client makes a post request to this slash personnel endpoint, we take the body and insert into our collection, right? So that's what we're doing. Depending on the success or the error response of the database, we return the information back to the client. So we aren't returning yet, but we are logging it out. Let's first save and run this. Let me clear this out. Now, to create this request, to simulate this request, we don't have a front end right now. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use a command line utility called curl. So if you're using Linux or Windows, Linux or Mac-based machines, you will have curl installed by default. If you're using Windows, I suggest you use PowerShell and use this command. So I'll just say curl, and I will do a post request. All right. So in here, I will set the headers for this request. I'll say content type of application JSON, and I will pass in the data. So here, first of all, I need to pass in the first name. So let's say the first name is John. The last name is Doe. And all right, looks like everything is fine here. Did I miss any double quotes anywhere? Nope. All right, so let me, okay, there's something wrong here. Let me quickly check this. Sometimes the command line actually throws me an error because it formats it incorrectly. So let me clear this out. All right, so let me do one thing actually. Let me add some space here. All right, great. Now I need to add the URL. So I'll say HTTP localhost, since this is running on my local system, and 5000 and personnel. All right, so what do you think will happen right now? It won't run because our server is not running, right? So what we need to do is we need to, in a different instance, we need to run the server. So we'll say node index.js. Make sure that we are connecting to our database. And in the first instance, I'm going to send this data. Okay, so let me press enter, and it should return the success object back to me. All right, so if I move back here, since we have logged the data, so if you notice, it logged it out. That means the record was inserted correctly. So it gave us an object ID as well, and it gave us insert count and the insert IDs. Okay, so let me quickly start the MongoDB Compass and see the data. All right, so I'm going to connect to my Atlas instance, go to the database accounting department, and go to the collection. So the collection is personnel. And if I see here, it created the record. So that's great. So now let's go back. Let's minimize this, and instead of logging it out, we'll just send the response as it is. So if you notice here, there's a result object within the main result object. So if we want to give only this information back to the client, then we can just say result.result. So it will be like this. Save this, and let me quickly go to the curl, and instead of John Doe, let's add Jane Doe. All right, let me see if the node is actually running. Okay, it's running fine. And we press enter. Oh, I need to restart the server, my mistake. It will still give me the console.log for Jane Doe because I didn't restart the server. All right, that's fine. Let's restart the server. Okay, great. And in here, let's add another record. So we have John, Jane. Let's add Joni Doe. We don't really care about the name. So we got a response here. So the response was sent, and here it is. So if I go back to the MongoDB and refresh this, I should have 3 records here. Okay, perfect. So we did the post endpoint correctly. Now let's work on the get endpoint. All right, so let me go back. Let me stop the server so that I don't make the same mistake of when updating the code. All right, let me remove the unnecessary log, keep the code clean. Perfect. Now, after the post, let's set up an get endpoint. So I'll just say app.get personnel request response. All right. Now in here, the first thing we need to do is we need to find. If you notice this is a generic get. So I'm getting all of the records back. Okay. We are not getting any specific records, so we are not looking for Jane or John. Okay. So I'm getting all of them back. So I'll just be saying collection.find, and in here I will be passing in a blank object. Okay, we're passing in a blank object, and I'm going to be adding it to an array. So I'll just say to array, and in here, oops, I made a mistake. All right, in here I'm going to be handling the error in result. All right, first things first, error. If error, then response dot send status of 500, and I'm going to send error as it is. Okay, and if not, then send the result. All right, perfect. Let me save this. So the goal here is to return all the data in our collection representing people. So if you notice that we have no query conditions, that's why we have the empty object here in the find command, and the results will get converted to an array. So let's test this out using the curl, the command line tool that we've been using thus far. And let me go back and first of all start the application. I'll just say node index, and in the first terminal, I'll clear this out. And what we need to do is instead of post, we need to use get. So I'll say get http localhost at port 5000, endpoint is personnel. Entered, and I got everything back in an array. So within an array, it's an array of objects, right? So the first thing I got is John Doe, next is Jane, and the third one is Joni Doe. That's perfect. All right, that's good. Now let's say if you wanted to see if you have more records, right? And API consumers, your front-end consumers, those are, they will need to retrieve a single record according to its ID. So how will we do that, right? So instead of using the blank array here, we will use, and also instead of using find, we'll use find one and pass in the ID, okay? So let's actually reuse this code and alter it a bit. I'm just going to copy it. All right, so at the endpoint, I'm going to be working with ID. Okay, instead of find, I am going to be using find one. Hold on, let me actually replace the whole thing here so that we don't have any confusion. So instead of collection.find, we'll be using collection.find1. And in here, instead of blank object, we'll be passing in the ID. Okay, and here we will actually be looking at the parameters that we'll be sending in. So we need to send the parameters parameter of an ID, and then we get that ID in our application, Node.js application, and then we send it to the MongoDB to look at that ID, look up that ID. Okay, so let me actually clear everything out so there is no confusion. So let me quickly type this up. So we'll say collection.find1. In here, instead of blank object like the last time, what we will do is you will look up by ID. And here I will say new object ID. And in here I will just pass in the request .parameters.id. All right, perfect. So here, now, let me handle the error and result. All right, so first things first, if error, then response.status of 500, send error. Okay, if not, then send the result. All right, perfect. All right, so we are going to use this route parameter to get the specific personnel information from MongoDB. So parameters are options. Parameters are options that you can pass with the endpoint, such as specifying the response format or the amount returned to influence the response. Okay, so this time around we'll be having a route parameter called ID, which will represent the object ID in Mongo database. Okay, using the find one method, we can get the single record based on the criteria included in the object ID. So ID is not just a string. Okay, so we are converting it into a object type of object ID. Okay, depending on the actual data in our database, we can do the CRUD command. Okay, so let me make sure the application is restarted. Close this out, restart the application, go back to the first terminal, clear this out, and use the curl command. Okay, so let's say curl get http localhost port 5000 personnel, and now here we need to pass in the object ID. Okay, so we don't know the object ID yet, but in an ideal world we'll be using something called Postman that will be covering in the next session. For now, let's quickly test this out. So let's look up John Doe. So let me quickly copy his object ID. Paste it. I don't need the rest of the information here. I just need the object ID. All right, perfect. So, okay. All right, so I think I made a mistake here. Yeah, okay. Now this query looks fine. The URL is correct. The object ID is correct. And if I press enter, it returns the record for John Doe. So great. Now that we have completed it, we have built a RESTful API with get and post endpoints. So now if you want, you can add more endpoints to this. You can add update or delete. Okay, so I will leave that up to you to add these two endpoints. That will be like your homework exercise. But what we have learned thus far is to develop a custom API and connect it with MongoDB to fetch and manipulate the data. So you can also improve upon the API security and scalability. If you go back to the PowerPoint slides, you'll find resources for best practices. And you can also implement the same project, the same node application project with a different database. Okay. So that's it. We have completed project 1, and I will see you in project 2, in where we will be covering the user authentication system using Node.js and MongoDB, in which you will actually be working with best practices, and also will be using with a tool called Postman. All right, so I'll see you in the next session. Take care.